June 6, 1944, Brécourt Manor, Normandy, France. What 17 men accomplished in the next 3 hours should have been impossible. The order came at 8:30 in the morning, simple and direct. "There's fire along that hedgerow there. Take care of it." Captain Clarence Hester, the battalion operations officer, swept his hand toward the sound of German artillery hammering Utah Beach. First Lieutenant Richard Winters, acting commander of Easy Company, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division, had just been handed a mission that would become one of the most studied small unit actions in military history. But Winters wasn't supposed to be in command. That responsibility should have fallen to First Lieutenant Thomas Meehan III, Easy Company's true commander. Meehan, however, was nowhere to be found. The terrible truth would emerge later. His C-47 transport, Chalk No. 66, had been struck by anti-aircraft fire over Beauceville-au-Plain during the pre-dawn drop. Meehan and all 18 paratroopers aboard died when the plane crashed in flames. The command passed to Winters by default, thrust upon him in the chaos of the largest amphibious invasion in human history. 7 hours earlier, Winters had jumped into the darkness over Normandy. The violent exit from his C-47 had torn most of his equipment from his body, a common fate among the scattered paratroopers. He'd been fortunate enough to scavenge a discarded M1 rifle and a handful of grenades during his trek through the French countryside to the small village of Le Grand Chemin, where the battalion had established a temporary command post. Now, standing in that Norman village as dawn broke over the hedgerows, Winters counted his available men. 11. From a company that normally fielded nearly 200 soldiers, he could muster only 11. With him stood Lieutenant Lynn Buck Compton, Staff Sergeant Carwood Lipton, Staff Sergeant Bill Guarnere, Sergeants Don Malarkey and Myron Ranney, Corporals Joseph Liebgott, John Plesha, and Joe Toye, and Privates Walter Hendricks, Robert Popeye Wynn, and Cleveland Petty. The chaotic airborne assault, however, had scattered men from multiple units across the Norman countryside. Winters moved quickly to gather volunteers. Private John Hall from Alpha Company stepped forward. Gerald Lorraine and Virgil Red Kimberling from Headquarters Company agreed to join. Then Private Walter Hicks from Fox Company appeared and offered his service. Winters sent him to find others from his unit. Hicks returned with Sergeant Julius Rusty Houck. The assault force now numbered 17 men, including Winters himself. Among this hastily assembled group lurked a wild card. Bill Guarnere had learned before the jump that his brother had been killed fighting in Italy. Rage consumed him. He wanted German blood. Earlier that morning, when the scattered paratroopers had encountered a horse-drawn supply convoy, Guarnere had unleashed his fury, slaughtering men and animals in a savage burst of fire. He was angry, grieving, and he didn't yet trust Winters. As Guarnere would later confess, no one in Easy Company had proven themselves in combat. The peacetime training and weekend maneuvers were over. This was different. This was real. Winters gathered his small team along a road just outside Le Grand Chemin, roughly 5 miles inland from the blood-stained beaches. His instructions were terse. Just weapons and ammo. Leave everything else here. Sergeant Lipton instinctively dropped his musette bag, which contained blocks of TNT and percussion caps. Within the hour, he would deeply regret that decision. Winters led his force across an open field toward the sound of the guns. He crawled ahead of his men along a hedgerow until he reached a position where he could observe the enemy battery. What he saw was formidable. 4 105mm artillery pieces, dug into fighting positions behind a hedgerow, connected by zigzagging trenches. 3 guns faced east, hurling shells toward Utah Beach, where American infantrymen were struggling through the surf. 1 gun faced north, protecting the battery's left flank. The entire position resembled an L shape, a textbook defensive arrangement. The field itself was surrounded by hedgerows. These weren't the decorative garden borders familiar to British and American soldiers. These were ancient Norman hedgerows, thick earthen walls 6 feet high, dense with centuries of overgrowth, roots, and brambles. They were as impenetrable as stone fortresses. Behind the 105s, on the far side of the field, a few machine gun nests provided rear security. At the opposite end of the field ran a narrow country road. Beyond it stood a barn and a house, Brécourt Manor. Winters had no way of knowing it, but his 17 men were about to engage approximately 50 soldiers from the 6th Battery of the 90th German Regimental Artillery. The local French civilians considered these young German gunners to be fanatical Nazis, true believers in the Reich. Earlier that morning, German Lieutenant Colonel Friedrich von der Heide, an experienced paratrooper commanding the 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, had climbed the church tower at nearby Sainte-Marie-du-Mont. From that vantage point, he'd seen the massive Allied invasion fleet off Utah Beach. He'd rushed to the battery at Brécourt Manor at 8 in the morning and immediately ordered the guns manned and firing. By the time Winters received his orders, the German gunners had already repulsed 1 probing attack from elements of the 506th. The odds were stacked against the Americans. But Winters had a plan. He devised a strategy rooted in the fundamental principle of fire and maneuver. He would establish a base of fire using machine guns to suppress the enemy position. Then, lead an assault force across the open ground to seize the first gun. Close on their heels would follow a secondary element to disable the captured weapon. Once the first gun fell, they would work methodically down the trench system, taking each consecutive artillery piece until the entire battery was silenced. It was simple. It was direct. It was also extraordinarily dangerous. Winters positioned 130 caliber machine gun, manned by Petty and Liebgott, to provide covering fire as his assault team moved into position. He divided his remaining men into 2 teams and led them closer to the German guns. He placed a second machine gun along a hedge directly facing the first artillery piece, manned by Plesha and Hendricks. He warned them not to fire unless they had clear targets. Their position was exposed. Every shot had to count. He then ordered Lipton and Ranney to work their way along the hedgerow to the right, providing flank security. As Winters and his men crawled through the grass toward the German trenches, Winters spotted movement. A German helmet bobbing above the parapet. He fired twice. The helmet disappeared. He ordered Malarkey to lead the assault. Don Malarkey, a young sergeant from Oregon, took a deep breath. He began snaking forward on his elbows and knees, carbine held ready, staying low in the foot-high Norman grass. His heart hammered in his chest. Suddenly Winters realized the problem. Malarkey had grenades, but was out of carbine ammunition. "Wait, Malarkey! Get back here!" Winters shouted. Malarkey scrambled back. Winters told him to get more ammunition while ordering Compton forward instead. Malarkey would later reflect that Winters probably saved his life. It wouldn't be the last time. Buck Compton, armed with a borrowed Thompson submachine gun he'd never fired before, began his crawl through the grass. Winters and the others provided covering fire, their rifles cracking in the morning air. Compton reached the hedgerow and peered over. 2 Germans were loading and firing one of the massive artillery pieces, completely focused on targets miles away at Utah Beach, oblivious to the danger creeping up behind them. Compton was supposed to observe and report, but something in him snapped. Perhaps it was the adrenaline. Perhaps it was the training taking over. Or perhaps it was simply the warrior instinct. He jumped from the hedgerow into the trench and charged toward the Germans. About halfway down the trench, he planted his feet, raised the Thompson to his waist like a gangster in a Hollywood movie, and squeezed the trigger. Nothing happened. Just a slight plunk sound. The firing pin had broken. Time seemed to freeze. Compton stared at the Germans. The Germans, spinning around from their gun, stared at Compton in utter surprise. There were 2 of them, 1 of him. They were fully armed. He held a useless weapon. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Bill Guarnere came roaring up beside Compton and opened fire with his Thompson. 1 German crumpled instantly. The other leaped out of the trench and sprinted across the field. Compton, a former college baseball star who'd once dreamed of the major leagues, yanked a grenade from his belt and hurled it with perfect form. The grenade exploded directly above the running German's head, killing him instantly. The Germans still alive in the trenches ran in the opposite direction. Winters and the rest of the team poured into the position, hurling grenades and firing everything they had. The speed and ferocity of the assault convinced the Germans they were facing an entire company, not a handful of paratroopers. The first 105mm gun was now in American hands. Meanwhile, Lipton and Ranny had reached their flanking position, but the heavy undergrowth blocked their view. Hearing the assault begin, they quickly climbed 2 small trees near the hedgerow. The trees were weak and slender, forcing Lipton to carefully balance himself on a branch close to the trunk. From this precarious perch, he could see Germans in prepared positions and lying prone in the field, all firing toward Winters's assault force. None had yet spotted the 2 Americans above them. Lipton fired 2 shots at 1 prone German. The man seemed to simply duck down. Unsure if he'd hit his target, Lipton fired at a dirt mound to check his rifle's sighting. The dirt exploded exactly where he aimed. Satisfied, knowing his first 2 shots had found their mark, Lipton began systematically engaging the Germans below him. Back at the first gun position, a German stick grenade exploded in the trench near Popeye Win, shrapnel tearing into his buttocks. "I'm sorry, Lieutenant," he called out to Winters. I goofed, I'm sorry." But the Americans had the Germans reeling. They couldn't stop now. To pause would give the enemy time to realize how badly they outnumbered the attackers. Another German potato masher grenade landed in the trench, this one rolling between Joe Toye's legs. "Joe!" Winters hollered. "Move, for Christ's sake, move!" Toye flipped over and scrambled forward. The grenade detonated. The wooden stock of Toye's rifle absorbed most of the blast. Toye received only wooden splinters embedded in his skin. Shaken, but alive, he continued fighting. The team resumed firing down the trench. 3 Germans leaped out and fled across the open field, presenting perfect targets. Winters called for Lorraine and Guarnere. All 3 opened fire. Winters hit his man in the head. Lorraine caught his target with a burst from his Thompson. Guarnere, so full of adrenaline and rage, missed his man entirely. The thought consumed him. He never missed, never. Guarnere's German switched direction and headed toward one of the guns. He'd taken only 2 steps when Winters drilled him in the back. Guarnere, recovering his composure, pumped the wounded German full of lead. A 4th enemy soldier appeared about 100 yards away and began running. Winters dropped to a prone position, took a steady bead, and felled him with a single shot. The entire engagement, from the moment they'd rushed the first gun to this instant, had taken perhaps 15 or 20 seconds. Malarkey spotted 2 Germans farther down the trench, setting up a machine gun. As he threw a grenade, Winters also opened fire, hitting one man in the hip, the other in the shoulder. Malarkey climbed out of the trench and, spraying the area with his Thompson, headed toward the second 105. The Germans were fleeing. He slid into position next to a dead German beneath the gun. Out in the field, he noticed another dead German with a case on his hip. A Luger pistol, he assumed, a souvenir. He bolted toward the corpse. "Malarkey, you idiot!" Winters shouted. "Get back here!" But Malarkey was committed. He reached the dead German and grabbed for the case. It contained only an artillery sighting device. Damn! The Germans, who had held their fire during his mad dash, now opened up. Bullets kicked up dirt around his feet like hailstones. He charged back to the safety of the 105, diving into the gun pit as his helmet flew off. He lay on his back, panting, while bullets smacked into the gun above him, dropping burning metal fragments onto his face. As Malarkey rolled over, he heard Guarnere calling to him from the trench about 5 feet away. "Malark, we'll time the bursts!" The 2 men began counting the intervals between enemy machine gun bursts. "Okay," Guarnere called. "Next burst ends, get your ass over here!" Silence. Then Guarnere shouted, "Now!" Malarkey bolted. He made it. "Way to go!" Guarnere congratulated him. "You stupid Mick!" Winters prepared the men for the assault on the second gun. He ordered Compton and Toye to provide covering fire. Then backtracked down the trench, where he found Wynne still lying on the ground, continuing to apologize for being wounded. Winters, unable to spare a man as escort, ordered Wynne to make his way back to battalion headquarters alone. The loss was soon compensated when Lieutenant Bob Brewer, one of Easy Company's assistant platoon commanders, joined the assault force. German fire was intensifying. Compton and Brewer spotted an empty gun emplacement and jumped in, bullets streaming overhead. Inside, they saw a large ammunition box with a German grenade lying on top. Someone bumped the box. The grenade rolled off. The pin fell out. "Look out!" Compton yelled. There was nowhere to go. They braced against the embankments. The grenade exploded. When the smoke cleared, Everyone was covered in dirt, but miraculously unharmed. The explosion terrified one German into surrendering. He ran toward the Americans with his hands raised, crying. One of the paratroopers, a headquarters soldier, struck the prisoner in the mouth with brass knuckles built into his trench knife. The German began bleeding, spitting teeth. Probably a broken jaw. The violence was senseless. The prisoner offered no resistance. Compton grabbed the American by the arm, spun him around, and gave him hell. He told the man to get out of there. They didn't need that. While this unfolded in the trenches, Lipton and Rani, still in their tree perches, began receiving fire. Lipton had managed to get off between 20 and 30 rounds before the Germans finally realized they were being hit from above. Some turned and opened fire on the exposed troopers. Bullets clipped branches and cracked through the air around Lipton as he scrambled down. He reached the ground without a scratch. Lipton hurried toward the captured guns, coming across Popeye Wynne along the way. He sprinkled sulfa powder into Wynne's wound, bandaged it, then dragged him to a farm cart for evacuation. When Lipton reached the first gun position, Winters told him they had nothing with which to disable the 105s. Lipton suddenly remembered the TNT he'd left in his musette bag back at the assembly area. He crawled back toward Le Grand Chemin to retrieve it. On his return trip, he encountered a group of American officers and men heading in his direction. The officer at the front turned back and asked Lipton where he could find headquarters. Lipton glanced at the man behind him, Warrant Officer J.G. Andrew Hill, who started to answer. Before Hill could speak, a bullet struck him in the forehead. He died instantly. Back at the first gun, the German prisoner who'd been struck with the brass knuckles continued moaning and groaning. Winters finally went over, kicked him in the pants, and ordered him to walk toward battalion headquarters. Just as the man stood to leave, Winters noticed 3 Germans walking casually toward his position, seemingly unaware of the battle. He directed 2 riflemen to set their sights to about 200 yards. When the Germans stopped and seemed to listen for something, Winters called out, "Ready! Aim!" Suddenly Lorraine opened up with his Thompson. 1 German went down wounded, but the German machine guns immediately responded, tearing across the top of Winters's trench. An opportunity wasted. Winters wasn't about to waste another. He'd noticed that German machine gun fire had slackened near the first gun position. He deduced that by charging the second gun with good covering fire, his men wouldn't be exposed to as much enemy fire. He ordered 3 men to remain at the first gun for covering fire. Then, like a coiled spring released, the rest charged the second gun, throwing grenades and yelling. They quickly captured the second 105. 2 guns down, 2 to go. Winters sent a runner back to battalion headquarters requesting more ammunition and men. He noticed that Petty, manning one of the machine guns, had been hit in the neck. He ordered Malarkey to take over the weapon. The Germans were trying to regain the initiative. A German officer, rifle in hand, approached Brécourt Manor and asked the owner, Mr. Charles de Vallevier, a retired colonel who'd fought in the First World War, if he could use the second story as a sniper position. De Vallevier refused. He lied, claiming the house had no windows. The German, surprisingly, didn't protest and left. For the remainder of the battle, the house remained unoccupied by German forces, save for 2 wounded men. 8 civilians occupied the manor during the battle, including a 2-month-old infant. None were injured. After about half an hour, 2 machine gun crews arrived from battalion. Winters positioned them for the assault on the 3rd gun. This attack would be different. Ammunition was running dangerously low. There would be no more suppressive fire. Each trooper would pick his targets carefully. Every shot had to count. The men charged. Buck Compton would later write about what happened next. A tall kid, Private First Class John Hall, came down the trench and ran past him. Hall had served as a waiter in the officers' mess. Compton knew him, but not well. From the trench, Compton watched Hall spin around and sprint back. He took a bullet in the back and collapsed in front of Compton. Dead. No one stopped. There was no time for the dead or wounded. Morning would have to wait. The rest of Winter's men bolted forward. They captured the 3rd gun. For a second time, a few Germans came forward with their hands over their heads, calling out in broken English, "No, make me dead!" Winters counted 6 prisoners and sent them back to headquarters with an escort, along with another request for more ammunition and men. Concerned about a flank attack, Winters ordered Malarkey to take up a position back where they'd first launched the attack and guard the area. It was a lonely assignment. Malarkey would remain there for the rest of the battle, hurling grenades and firing at any Germans he saw. Captain Hester appeared in the trenches and provided Winters with 3 blocks of TNT and an incendiary grenade to disable the captured 105s. He also informed Winters that Lieutenant Ronald Speirs from Dog Company would soon arrive with a 5-man reinforcement team. Winters used the waiting time productively. He destroyed the captured guns and gathered intelligence. He spiked the 1st gun himself by dropping a block of TNT down its barrel. Someone pulled the fuse on a German potato masher grenade and slipped it down the barrel. The combined explosion rendered the weapon permanently inoperable. For the 2nd and 3rd guns, he gave the remaining TNT to Hicks and Kimberling, who also dropped grenades down the barrels. At the 2nd gun, Winters discovered a German map marking every battery position along the entire coast and their fields of fire. Valuable intelligence. He also noticed something peculiar: belts of wood-tipped ammunition. Were the Germans that desperate for lead? Lieutenant Speirs finally arrived with his reinforcements, including Privates Art Jumbo DiMarzio and Ray Taylor. Once Winters briefed him, Speirs did something remarkable. He charged the last gun alone, blazing away with his Thompson as he ran across open ground. One of the men watching said in amazement, "Look at that crazy mother go!" Bill Guarnere, still hyped on adrenaline, followed right behind Speirs. The other Dog Company men and the 2 Fox Company troopers, Hicks and Houck, charged after them. As they ran down the trench, Rusty Houck rose to throw a grenade. Just as he released it, a burst of automatic weapons fire stitched across his back and shoulders. He died instantly. Hicks took a bullet in the shin that mushroomed on impact, tearing up his calf. "I think I slowed one down," he told the trooper who bandaged his wound. The fury of Speirs's attack terrified the remaining Germans. They leaped out of the last gun pit and began running, just as Speirs jumped in, feet first. He opened fire on the fleeing soldiers until an enemy grenade exploded near him. The last gun was finally in American hands. The battery at Brécourt Manor would trouble Utah Beach no more. As the firing died away, Bill Guarnere picked up a pair of German binoculars and was using them to examine the German machine gun positions when he suddenly collapsed. Joe Toye spotted him and, thinking his friend was dead, smacked him on the back of the helmet. Guarnere jumped up, startled. He'd scared Toye, and Toye had scared him. With his adrenaline finally spent and the mission complete, Guarnere had simply fallen asleep. The mission accomplished, Winters ordered his men to withdraw back to headquarters at Le Grand Chemin. He pulled out the machine gunners first, followed by the riflemen. Guarnere spotted Malarkey at his lonely guard position and called to him, "Malark, pull back to the trench." Malarkey followed, dropping a fragmentation grenade down the tube of the first 105 for good measure as he passed. To cover the withdrawal, Malarkey manned a 60mm mortar, while Toye and Guarnere fired 30-caliber machine guns across the field, blasting the hedgerows near the fourth gun. Malarkey fired so many rounds he buried his mortar in the ground. He'd lost his base plate during the jump and was forced to bore sight his weapon. His firing shattered every window in the manor house but harmed none of the civilians sheltering inside. As Winters withdrew, he noticed a wounded German trying to operate a machine gun. Winters raised his rifle and shot the man through the head. Making his way back to headquarters, Winters came across the body of Warrant Officer Hill, lying dead with his right arm sticking straight up in the air, his watch exposed. Machine gun rounds whizzed overhead. Winters crawled past the body, then stopped. He turned around and reached for Hill's wrist to remove the watch. "You are nuts," he thought to himself. "This watch isn't worth it." He left it. The guns of Brécourt Manor were silenced, but several German machine gun positions remained, capable of troubling any American who passed. Winters wanted to eliminate the entire position, but he lacked sufficient men. After refreshing himself with a swig of hard cider, he found about 30 Easy Company men, led by Lieutenants Harry Welsh and Warren Roush, paratroopers who'd been scattered far and wide during the drop and had only now reached the battalion. In addition, Lieutenant Lewis Nixon, the battalion intelligence officer, arrived riding alongside 2 tanks that had just clanked up from Utah Beach. Winters finally had the force he needed for his final assault. He found Malarkey and Toye asleep in a barn. "Malark! Toye! Let's go! Hang tough!" That was all they needed. The 2 men followed Winters out. Winters led his reinforced element back to the field, approaching this time from behind the machine gun nests. The men advanced alongside the tanks, firing at anything that moved. There was no opposition. Soon, all was quiet, except for a few moans and groans from the remaining wounded Germans. There would be no more trouble from Brécourt Manor. The 3-hour battle was finally over. Winters was the last man to leave the field. For his leadership in the battle, Dick Winters was recommended for the Medal of Honor. It was downgraded to a Distinguished Service Cross. There existed an unwritten agreement among the Airborne Division commanders who fought on D-Day that only 1 Medal of Honor would be awarded per division during the Normandy operation. Lieutenant Colonel Robert G. Cole, commanding the 3rd Battalion of the 101st Airborne, earned that honor for leading a bayonet charge against German positions near Compton on June 11th. He was killed in Holland during Operation Market Garden, before he could receive it. Several groups have since tried unsuccessfully to upgrade Winters's commendation. The fight for Brécourt Manor proved the mettle of the 2nd Battalion's officers and men. Winters had devised a quick, sound strategy and saved lives through his attention to detail and quick thinking. Compton led by example and refused to tolerate misconduct, even in the chaos of battle. Speirs charged hell for leather at the final gun. None of the officers hesitated during those critical hours in the trenches. The airborne non-commissioned officers and enlisted men proved themselves warriors. Fighting for the first time, exhausted, outnumbered, in unfamiliar terrain, they had bested part of the veteran German war machine. The battle was a victory for the entire 2nd Battalion of the 506th. Lieutenant Winters led elements of Easy and Fox companies, along with paratroopers from battalion headquarters, to capture the first 3 guns. Dog Company, supported by a few Fox Company men and a single Easy Company man, captured the final gun. Teamwork and training proved invaluable to the men who wore the Screaming Eagle on their shoulders. The battle for Brécourt Manor has become legendary. It stands as one of the best documented small unit actions of D-Day. In 1992, historian Stephen Ambrose published Band of Brothers, a history of Easy Company's exploits throughout the Second World War. The battle features prominently in its pages. In 2002, HBO premiered a television miniseries of the same title, recreating the battle for a national audience. Dick Winters, who corresponded with the veterans of Brécourt Manor for Ambrose's book, donated his entire collection of papers and materials to the United States Army Heritage and Education Center at the Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Aspiring military leaders can now study the battle and other Easy Company experiences for themselves. 21 American paratroopers attacked approximately 50 German soldiers and successfully disabled 4 artillery pieces. Winters noted in his autobiography the final tally: 4 Americans dead, 6 wounded. They had inflicted 15 German dead and captured 12 prisoners. It was a lopsided victory for the outnumbered paratroopers. Winters reflected on the significance. Even though Easy Company was still widely scattered, the small portion that fought at Brécourt had demonstrated the remarkable ability of the airborne trooper to fight, albeit outnumbered, and to win. Buck Compton had his own perspective on what they'd accomplished. History has shown that troops landing at Utah Beach had an easier time, due in part to what was accomplished at Brécourt. I'm happy about that. If our actions saved any of our boys' lives, that's part of what we were there to do. But Compton carried something else with him from that field. There's a sense of guilt that will always be part of the war for me. It's the guilt I feel from making mistakes. It's the guilt I feel because I survived. Surviving a war is such a tricky thing. Why does one man live through a chaotic situation when another man doesn't? Out of all the horror of war, the guilt of survival is one of the things that haunts me most to this day. I will never know why I survived when so many others did not. When it comes to understanding any of this, I have long since given up trying. Today, the fields at Brécourt Manor are quiet. The hedgerows remain, ancient and overgrown. The manor house still stands. Visitors walk the ground where 17 American paratroopers faced 50 German soldiers and changed the course of D-Day. The trenches are gone, filled in by time and weather. The shell casings have been collected. The blood has long since washed away. But what happened there on the morning of June 6, 1944, endures. It endures in the military academies where the battle is studied as a master class in small unit tactics. It endures in the memories of the families of those who fought and fell. It endures in the very soil of Normandy, where the price of freedom was paid in full by men who had every reason to fail, but refused to do so. The mission was simple. There's fire along that hedgerow there. Take care of it. What followed was anything but simple. It was courage. It was leadership. It was 17 men doing the impossible because there was no other choice, because their brothers were dying on Utah Beach, because the invasion hung in the balance, because that's what American paratroopers did on D-Day. They took care of it. Retry.